Shop Tours VST. I'm Jim Bucknell, and Greg is here as our official photographer, and he'll be a star of a later segment. And we're going to talk about some handy things relating to the table saw. First one is what's called a supercharged rip fence, and it was in Fine Woodworking number 231 if you want to look it up in your library or in our library or on the internet. And basically what it consists of, I've got the fence on the table saw, but this is the one I built for my bandsaw. And the slick thing about it is these clamps, because you build this slot wider than your fence, just a little bit wider than your fence on your saw. And then when you clamp these down, it pulls it against the fence, so you don't have to have a perfect fit, and yet it locks in really solid. So that's again issue number 231, called the supercharged rip fence. And the one for the table saw has replaceable faces that I built for it, so you can replace those and you can hook a number of attachments to it. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is one of the attachments that we've developed. It's called an L fence, and because it's shaped like an L. And so there are several things you can do with it. I'm going to show you a couple of the basics, and then Greg has figured out a really clever new wrinkle for it that I think will sort of blow your mind. It did me, and so it's pretty cool. So if you want to use your table saw to straighten a weird piece, there's a couple ways of doing it if you don't have a jointer. And this is the kind of piece where how many passes through the jointer would it take to straighten that out? You know, at a 1/16 of an inch at a pass, you're going to be at it for a while. So what we can do here is, with this L fence, it is set to be just clear above the blade and dead flush with the outside edge of the blade with this edge. And the key to the L fence is there's an area here underneath here for cutoffs, and so you don't get pinched when you cut pieces off, and they don't kick back. So the way to do it, I've put double-sided tape on this piece of straight plywood. It's just a straight edge. Peel those off, and I'm just going to pick a spot here where it's going to be where I want the straight edge. So make sure both blue pieces are on the board, and then just press that down. Okay. Now, excuse me while I get my hearing protectors and my eye protection. So I will start that. So the idea is to slide this edge against this edge, and it will cut along this line and give you a straight edge. You can see I got a perfectly straight edge matching my straight edge. And so now, if I want to true this piece up, then I can just run this against the regular table saw fence and get a parallel edge, or I can cut strips, whatever I want to do. But I've now got a straight edge that would have been hard to get with anything else. You could come pretty close by cutting it with your bandsaw and then joint the edge. But if you don't have a bandsaw, you don't have a jointer, this is a great way of straightening a piece of lumber, as long as you've got a straight board like this and an L fence to glide against it. The other thing you can use this for is cutting an angle on, say, a piece of plywood. Let's say you have a piece of plywood and you want to make a long taper on it, and I've just got a piece of 1/4 inch plywood here. I can set the blade down, although I don't really need to. So again, exactly the same principle. Let's say I just want to make a line about like this. To cut a taper on this edge, which is tricky to do with anything else. Again, you just run the edge against your L fence. And we need to lower the L fence a bit. Wait till the blade stops. want the blade high enough that your piece gets cut and your guide bar rides against the fence. So here we go again. And again, there you go. Before we get started on another little table saw tip, I wanted to talk about shop aprons just real briefly. This is the one I used for years with a little bit of a glue history to it. The main thing is it had one band around your neck, which when you're hung much on the weight of your neck, it just killed you. So I looked on the internet and I found this shop apron, which is by Jonathan Katz-Moses. He's got a great set of YouTube videos. And I really like this thing. It's heavy waxed canvas, lots of pouches. I've got a fair amount of stuff in it, but it puts the weight on your shoulders. The only thing I have to do is remember to, when I use a tool, actually put it back in the apron instead of laying it on the table. And then I don't spend the next half hour looking for the tape measure that should be in this pocket, but is actually over there instead. So anyway, Jonathan Katz-Moses, I really like this apron. It was about $43, I think, and they come in left and right-handed. I'm primarily left-handed, so this is the left-handed version, which means this pocket goes over here, so I can take it out with my right hand and grab my pencils with my left hand. That's what the traditional right-handed one is just the opposite. It also has a leather-lined deal for a marking knife or an awl, so you don't stab your leg or blow through the bottom of the apron. So anyway, really pleased with that apron. The other thing we're going to talk about today is an auxiliary fence for your table saw, which is just a fence that can be sacrificed, a sacrificial fence when you need it to be. If you've got this beautiful face on your fence, you don't want to chew that up. And if you're cutting, for example, a 3/4 inch dado or a rabbit on the edge of a board, if you cut too close, you'll get into this. So this is a sacrificial fence, and this is just 3/4 MDF. And these clamps are from Rockler, and they're really slick because they don't get in the way at all. They just clamp on your fence wherever you need it, and give you that auxiliary fence. So if you had a dado head on, you could bring it over, crank it up slowly into the fence, leave the amount that you want exposed, and then run your stuff through and not damage your fence. This one has a number of holes here along the top, and that's because there are times when I want to use this to measure cutoffs. And so I will move it down like this. Clamp it like so. And then finding the tape measure in its proper pocket for a change. You can measure here, and let's say you want to cut 5-inch pieces off of your off of a board. You can come over here, set that for 5 inches. Now as you are going to cut off a piece, you slide it over against this, make the cutoff piece falls in here, and there's no danger of kickback. So I'm using this fence again, not as a sacrificial fence, but just as a fence that allows me to have this cutoff area. So it's an easy and quick way to get consistent cutoffs and do it safely so you don't get kickback. I wanted to show you a stop block that I got from the same guy that did my apron, Jonathan Katz-Moses. This is a really nice stop block because it hooks into a standard T-track, but it locks up really rigid so it doesn't flex at all. And so you slide your piece up here and cut, and it's really slick. And if you turns out that you're off just a little bit, you can actually cheat this edge a little bit to fine tune your cuts and then get really repeatable cuts because it doesn't flex. It also allows you to move it out from the fence a little bit. So let's say you're cutting these pieces and you come up on a piece that has a rough edge that you want to trim, like this. You can then, instead of cutting like this, you can lay the piece over like this, slide it through, make your cut, trim that edge, and then flip it back around, Now you got a good square edge to go off of. You lay that against the stop block and you cut it, and it comes out perfect. So it's a really flexible little stop block. Flexible in the sense that you can use it a lot of ways, but not flexible in the sense that it doesn't move at all. It's really rigid and locks in, so you get really good repeatable cuts. So I've been really pleased with this, and he sells it on his website. Again, it's Jonathan Katz Moses, and I think it was about $40, but I've been really pleased with it. So that's it for that. And I'm going to talk just briefly about crosscut sleds for a table saw. It's a great way of doing accurate crosscuts once you got the sled built. One of the classes we've were thinking about doing before we started the COVID lockdown was building how to build a crosscut sled. The key is that this fence be dead square to the blade. Once you got that, you're there. But this is what the things typically look like, and you can slide it through like that. I just showed you the stop block that I use on it, but before that I used this really high-tech one, which is a piece of plywood labeled stop block, so I didn't use it for something else. But you can clamp it on wherever you want. It just doesn't have the same flexibility as this. I did have this one for cutting small pieces, where if you were cutting a very small piece in here and you're afraid of it getting kicked up, you could slide the piece over against that, clamp it down, then flip this up, make the cut. The piece just falls off to the side, then flip it down again, measure the next one, flip it up, make the cut. And it keeps the little small piece from getting trapped between the blade and the piece and getting destroyed and kicking back. So that's another little handy feature for the sled. So the next segment will be showing you another sled that I built. This is one I saw on the internet and I was really intrigued by it, and we'll provide a link for where I got it. I think the plans were $5 and it was well worth it. This is a much smaller sled, which is really handy for doing smaller pieces, box work and so on. It has 3 T-tracks in the side. I use the MicroJig T-track, where it's only got one track on the bottom. It's not a T-track, it's a MicroJig track though. And it fits into the slot and allows you to adjust for square, and it's pretty slick, so I really like that. So it's got the 3 T-tracks with places for hold down clamps. And then, so this one can slide over here, again, in theory. There we go. And so, again, you got places to hold down on either side of the blade and make your cuts. It also, I also built this for it, which can slide in this track, and this is cut at a 45-degree angle, so you can clamp this in and bring it right down here and clamp it at 45, bring your pieces in and cut, and you get a 45-degree angle very accurately, which is very, very handy. And you could then cut similar ones at different angles if you wanted to do 30s or 22.5s or whatever you were doing. So you can get really good results with that as well. The other thing that this one's, the really unique thing of this, and I like to make boxes, as some of you know, and so, is that you can slide it over here like this, turn the blade to 45 degrees, and then lock your pieces in over here and cut your box pieces at 45 degrees. And that's how I did these pieces. And so they just laid in like this. They were clamped down, cut off here, and then once I got one cut, then I laid it in over here and clamped it in as a stop block, and then it locks completely solid because it's wedging up against itself. So I got my pieces cut, and when I got done, it made a box that was absolutely dead square, perfectly tight miters, really came out nice. So I was really pleased with the way this sled worked. And then because it's a smaller sled, you think you might have troubles with it in terms of cutting bigger pieces. So it also has plans for a table extension, which I won't install here, but it's got these aluminum bars on the back that are screwed in, and then over here there's threaded inserts that goes through these holes and screws in. So the whole thing, and then I've got festool domino slots cut, so it locks together like this and makes an extended fence. The other thing in building it that was interesting is I used 3/4 plywood glued together to form 2 layers for the fences. And what the woman that showed this, how to build this, did is she, even though plywood's pretty straight, it may not be dead straight, she clamped all the pieces together using a 4-foot level to clamp to, so it locked everything into straight. So I clamped these pieces up, I clamped this piece up. For my chop saw fence, I replaced it over there with a piece of the same stuff. Gang clamped them all together, all clamped to the 4-foot level, and they came out dead straight. So that was a pretty nice little trick that she had for making sure that the stuff comes out dead straight, which then gives you the accuracy that you need in your cutoff table. So this has been a really nice sled. I haven't used it a lot yet, but I'm looking forward to using it because the preliminary cuts I've done have worked out really, really well. So we'll provide the link to the video on how to get that and how to order the plans. So thank you.
For my part of this VST, I'm going to talk about the MicroJig dovetail clamp system. I used the 2 jigs you see here to make this, and I'm going to show you the process. I'm not actually going to make the cuts, but I'll show you the process in making something like this and how easy it can be with the right jigs. First of all, the MicroJig system itself is pretty simplistic. It's nothing more than a clamp like this, where the top of this F clamp has a dovetail shaped taper to it. And with a 14-degree dovetail bit set to 3/8 inch deep, it creates a slot that these will slide through and can be used to then clamp down anything, whatever you want to do with it. There are other components I'll get to in a minute that you can use with this, but this is the basics for it. And so, why use it? I guess the main thing, what MicroJig would have you believe, is that this is a cheaper alternative to using a lot of T-track, and in some ways more versatile. The only thing you really have to get to do what I'm doing here now is the F clamps here. And frankly, they're a little pricey, I think, for what you're getting, but when you add up the total cost of making a jig out this way, it's fairly reasonable. MicroJig will tell you themselves that they recommend that you use this with a good grade of plywood, or MDF will work, or hardwood. They do not recommend you use particle board. I think you can see the obvious reason that you could probably blow it out pretty easily. In doing this though, that was one of my major concerns, is what about the strength of this? If I've got this in here and I'm cranking down on it, am I going to blow through here? Stay tuned, we're going to do a destructive test to find out. Okay, so this jig here, back to trying to make something like this. This is 12-sided, which means that each of the joints is 30 degrees, and each edge of each segment of it is 15 degrees. So we're going to start by making a jig or a template for cutting that. This is going to be the template that we're aiming for. And what I did was I started with a 4-inch wide by 14-inch long block like this, or a piece like this of 3/4 inch ply. And I marked the width that I want the top and the width that I want the bottom to be. And what I did was to put the clamps in place, and this is a taper jig. So you can cut a straight edge or an angled edge. So I'm just going to line up the line with the edge of the jig and do the same thing back in the rear. Double check it, and that's how I would cut that. I would just run this through, and it's going to cut on the line here, the tapered line. Then I'd flip it around, I'd do the same thing to the other side, and I would end up with this. Okay? Now I'm going to take a second here, and because I'm going to want to reuse these clamps for the next step. But that's how you use a taper jig for this. And I'll show you while I'm on the topic. Take a brief moment out to show you a longer version of it. Same width. But in this case, what I've done is I've taken a couple of these wing knobs and these dovetailed nuts, I guess you could call them. They come like, if you can get it off of there, they look like this. And they come in 1 inch and 1.5 inch lengths as a kit. Here's a bag full of them. And they're the Dovetail Hardware Variety Pack and the Dovetail Hardware Pack. Two different things. The difference is what exactly they include in them. One of the pack also includes round knobs, and it also includes both the longer threaded piece and also a piece that has a threaded insert, so you can take your own stock if you need taller than these or a different length. So anyway, that's how you would make different things like fences. Another thing I'll point out right now while we're doing this is that if you have this, let's say you have this set up as a fence and you want to put a piece in here and clamp it down. You can also take just a circle or a sort of a teardrop shape and make a cam with the center hole slightly offset and put this through the center hole, bring it up against there, tighten it down, and then use the cam action to tighten it against the fence and tighten it down. So you can do it if you need something that is going to provide force this way. You can make those cams. Back to where we were. So taking this, and using my version of a L fence, and a slightly different, using the dovetail clamp setup to attach it to the fence. What I would do here is I would take a couple of pieces of the stock I'm using, and that gives me the basic width. Now I usually have a piece of 1/8 inch or 16th inch MDF in the bin right there beside you, Jim. Okay, that works. So I can slip that in. That gives me the clearance. Now I can just tighten it down, bring the clamp up to a reasonable height. And I'm done with that. The next step in making these, the point I'm getting at here, and maybe I haven't made that yet, is that we're going to do this, all of this by using a template. This is now a template, so every one of the 12 pieces you cut out using this are going to be identical. You'll notice, maybe if you can see it, that I've already cut a taper here and a corresponding taper here. Those are for the splay of this, so that they sit, oops, got it the wrong way here, so that you've got a flat top and a flat bottom. Again, it was using an online calculator on triangles. You know that this is 4 inches wider at the top than at the bottom. So half of that's on this side and half is on this side, so it's 2 inches. So you have a triangle that's 2 inches wide on one leg by 14 inches tall, and you got a 90-degree here. So you can find the other angles by using any online triangle calculator. So it ended up being that what I wanted was about a little over an 8-degree angle to make these fit flush when it's completed. So you cut those first. Then the next step is to, what I did was I butt this up against the back side of the fence, put some double stick tape on here, bring this here into the middle of it, and drop it down. I don't have any double stick tape on it right now, but that will be the way it's going to look when you're ready to cut it. Now all you got to do, let's pretend that's staying fixed. What you're going to do is you're going to lower your blade. And I won't, well, maybe I should have. Yeah, I won't bother doing the angle. But you want to tilt your blade to a 15-degree angle and then line up the outside tooth with the edge of your L fence. Still a little high here. At that point, now remember this is tilted to 15 degrees. At that point, I can run this through and I will be cutting that edge off, flip it around and do the same thing here. And what I end up with is the piece that has the compound angles on it. We've got the taper here and we've got the angle here, as well as on each end. One other thing I didn't mention was you probably, when you're cutting these ends, you probably want to cut a slot to fit your bottom in. I didn't do that and had to go back and do it. So anyway, once you get that done, you do it 11 more times. It takes longer to explain the process than it does to do it. You pop your template off, put it on the next piece, cut it. Take your template off, put it on the next piece, cut it. And you got your 12 pieces. At that point, I think I had another piece here. So you're going to end up now with essentially 12 pieces like this. What I did was I stretched the green very stretchable tape across, several of them at a time, and then I do several more and join them until I had 12 of them in kind of this fan shape. Then the tricky part, take 12 pieces and flip them over. Not as hard as you would think. What you do is you take a piece of MDF or 1/4-inch ply or something like that, slide the whole thing off onto it, or if you're smart and you have foresight, you tape this up on top of it already, so you don't have to do that step. Then what I did was I took a separate piece, put it on top, held them together, flipped them over, so now they're this way, and again they're still connected with the tape underneath, but now the inside is what's showing here. And then I go ahead and I try to put some glue in there and a brush it in, and start rolling up each segment of it. So when you roll it, you can probably see it better on this side, you get the joint like that, and the stretch in the tape allows it to keep it snug. Once I had that halfway done, I brought it up on end and began to insert into the groove here the bottom panel that I put in, work it around until it's completed, tape it together. Then get yourself a little belt clamp and tighten it on down. I used for this, I used Tight Bond 2. Actually, I think I might have used the Extend, just because it would give me a little more time to do the work. When I got done, all it was, I had a little bit of squeeze out. But one nice thing about using this flooring, which incidentally was Restore in Bellingham, it's already pre-finished. Of course, there's no finish on the edges that I cut, so the glue works fine. Did get a little bit of glue, a squeeze out on it, so it took a little bit of sanding up at the top edge. But then I ran some Osmo finish over the top, and you can see that it does a much better job of matching the color to the sides, at least somewhat better. Anyway, you can get your flooring at Restore fairly reasonable, and it's a kind of a decent way to try it. So that is using several of the quick and dirty jigs that I made for this MicroJig system. And the one other thing I made that had no part in making this wastebasket was a torsion box with a additional, you guessed it, dovetail grid on it. So again, I thought one side here is flat, nice and straight and flat, as Jim showed us here some time ago. But I thought, well, do I really need two flat sides? Why not do one that I can use as a clamping surface? So, I don't know what I'm going to do with it yet, but I thought it's pretty handy. And so I did it this way. And I also had the idea, a couple of things you can do with this. One is that if I did want another flat surface, it'd take really nothing to take a piece of 3/8 inch Baltic birch, set it on top of here, and clamp it in a couple of places, and you'd have your flat surface. The other thing I was going to mention on this is that if you wanted to use, as Jim pointed out some time ago, that space becomes an issue in his shop sometimes, it does in mine too. And it occurred to me that I could make this with a couple of sawhorses. And if I flip it over this way, on top of the sawhorses, I can then go in and tighten it to fasten it to the sawhorses. So I've got a stable work surface with nothing showing up above it. No clamps to get in the way, so to speak. So that's what I wanted to talk about. So one thing I forgot, I promised you a little bit of a destructive test here. So what I'm going to do is see whether these two materials can hold up to the clamping pressure. Now, in this case, you got a flat piece you're clamping against it. The pressure coming up through the dovetail is equal to the pressure going down onto the piece of stock. So that should be okay. It doesn't appear as though there is any damage, and there is none, which is sort of what I expected. Now I'm going to try it on a piece of MDF, the same thing. And I am not seeing any damage. So they both work in that scenario. Now we're going to try with nothing exerting pressure down on it to see if we can tear it out. Perfect, no problem whatsoever. Last test. Well, I can see a bulge on this side. Yeah, it snaps back when you release the clamp, but this side was lifted up like a 32nd of an inch. So I would say that you can use either of these materials if you're clamping something down on it, but if the top of the dovetail track is open, I wouldn't use MDF.